The air above the valley shimmered with heat, turning the world into a blur of color and motion. Staff Sergeant Sarah Miller lay prone on the rocky ridge, her cheek pressed against the stock of the Macmillan TAC-50. The rifle felt heavy but balanced, the metal warm from the Afghan sun. 2,617 meters away, a compound sat quiet at the edge of a dusty village. Somewhere inside was the man responsible for months of IED attacks that had taken too many lives. Around here, the small task force waited in tense silence. A few still doubted she could handle the rifle, or that she could make a shot this far. She heard the low murmur of wind in her headset, the spotter's calm voice feeding her range and temperature. She barely moved. Every muscle in her body was still, except for her heartbeat, slowing to something controlled and deliberate. Through the scope, the valley danced with distortion, the target flickering in and out of focus. The clock was running out. The chance would come only once. She took a slow breath, let half of it go, and waited for the moment when everything inside the scope finally aligned. Something extraordinary was about to happen. Sarah Miller grew up on the edge of the Montana plains, where the wind never stopped moving and the sky seemed endless. Her father, a competitive long-range shooter, taught her to shoot before she turned 12. The first lessons were simple. Keep both eyes open. Breathe. Wait for the wind to tell you what it wants. They would spend long summer afternoons on a stretch of open pasture, her father setting up small targets among the prairie dog mounds. The rifle rested almost as long as she did, each shot separated by patience. The wind out there taught her more than any range could. It shifted without warning, bent the grass in silent patterns, and made her learn to read it like a language. By the time she was 15, she could hit a target at 400 yards with confidence. Competitions came soon after, and she won her first junior match, not by speed or luck, but by calm consistency. At 19, restless and looking for something more than trophies, she enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps. Boot camp stripped everything down to muscle and grit. She learned to march, shoot, clean, and carry, to follow orders and to earn respect the hard way. Her first role was as a rifleman, part of an infantry unit where every mistake had weight. During her 2 deployments to Iraq, she worked as a designated marksman, watching over patrols with quiet focus. The chaos around her never shook her. She found clarity behind the scope, her breathing steady while the world moved fast. The Marines valued that calm. It earned her a reputation for control under pressure. After her second deployment, she applied to the Scout Sniper School at Camp Pendleton. Many said she would not last a week. The instructors were blunt. The course broke plenty of men. They doubted a woman could carry the weight or endure the exhaustion. Sarah never argued. She just kept working. She passed every test, shot every course, and climbed every hill until there was nothing left to question. When she graduated, 3rd in her class, the quiet pride in her salute said everything. From the fields of Montana to the ranges of Pendleton, she learned the same truth again and again. Skill is built one round at a time, and doubt is just noise she learned to silence. The morning light filtered through the canvas walls of the briefing tent at Forward Patrol Base Tillman. Dust hung in the air, glowing in the slant of the sun as the task force gathered around a folding table covered with maps and satellite imagery. Captain James Voss stood at the front, his voice steady and clear. He was the mission commander, a Marine officer known for calm authority. Around the table sat Staff Sergeant Mark Colton, an Army Ranger, with 4 deployments behind him, Sergeant Daniel Garrett, the team's designated sniper, and Staff Sergeant Sarah Miller, the Marine sniper attached to the unit as a supporting shooter and spotter. A JTAC monitored radio traffic at the back, while an intelligence liaison from the operations center updated the feed from overhead ISR coverage. Voss outlined the situation without flourish. A Taliban commander responsible for a string of IED attacks had been located at a compound 8 kilometers northeast of the base. The man had been confirmed on site for the last 18 hours through persistent surveillance. The terrain, however, complicated everything. The compound sat on a plateau surrounded by open ground, exposed to multiple lines of sight but impossible to approach without being seen. Airstrikes were ruled out due to the proximity of civilian dwellings and strict rules of engagement. The mission parameters were narrow. Precision fire from long range was the only viable option. Voss traced a finger along the topographic lines on the map, pointing to a ridge across the valley, 2,600 meters from the target. Colton leaned forward, skeptical. He said that distance left almost no margin for error. That even with a TAC 50, the engagement bordered on impossible. Garrett nodded, his expression grim. He had made shots past 1,600 meters before, but nothing close to this. The captain listened, weighing their concerns against the reality of command approval and time-sensitive intelligence. Sarah sat silent, her face unreadable. She had heard skepticism before. The same measured doubt cloaked as professionalism. Voss finally spoke, his tone final. Garrett would take the shot. Sarah would accompany the team as spotter and backup. The tent fell quiet as the decision settled in. Around the table, maps rustled and pens clicked. But beneath the order and formality, Sarah felt the tension sharpen into something personal. She looked at the ridge marked on the map and knew that before this was over, someone would have to prove what was possible. At 4:30 in the morning, the team moved out from Forward Patrol Base Tillman. The desert air was cold, and the moonless sky gave them cover as they began the long climb through the valley. Night vision goggles painted the world in shades of green. Every step was careful, deliberate. No one spoke. The sound of boots on gravel and the low hum of distant wind were the only noises that broke the silence. The 9-man patrol was organized with Precision 4 Marines led by Staff Sergeant Sarah Miller, 4 Army Rangers under Staff Sergeant Mark Colton, and a JTAC responsible for maintaining contact with the Tactical Operations Center. Each person knew their spacing and hand signals. Moving in a staggered formation through the narrow wadi, Garrett and another ranger carried the Macmillan TAC-50, disassembled in 2 parts. The barrel and receiver separated to balance the weight. The rifle's Harris bipod and rear monopod were strapped to their packs, along with boxes of Hornady's 750-grain AMAX, 50 BMG match rounds. Sarah carried her M4A1 carbine, a full combat load, and roughly 58 pounds of additional gear, the spotting scope, ballistic computer, and Kestrel 5000. 700 elite weather meter were secured in a protective case that hung against her shoulder. A Vectronics rangefinder was clipped to the front of her vest for easy access. They moved slowly, halting every few hundred meters to scan for movement. Noise and light discipline were strict. Each man and woman blended into the shadows, the faint green glow of their optics flickering as they checked their sectors. The terrain grew steeper as the first gray light touched the eastern horizon. By the time they reached the ridge, the sun had begun to rise, and the temperature climbed quickly toward 90 degrees. At 7,200 feet of elevation, the air was thin and dry. The team settled behind natural rock cover, establishing overwatch positions along the ridgeline. The spotter confirmed the target range at 2,614 meters. The Kestrel displayed a temperature of 94 degrees Fahrenheit, variable winds between 12 and 16 knots from the northwest, and barometric pressure at 25.8 inches of mercury. As Sarah scanned the valley through her optic, heat shimmer distorted the view below. She exhaled slowly, aware that everything, the distance, the wind, the air, was about to test everything she had ever learned. At 10:47 in the morning, the ridge baked under a pale Afghan sun. The heat shimmered across the valley like waves on water. Sergeant Daniel Garrett lay prone behind the Macmillan TAC-50, the long barrel resting on a Harris bipod sunk deep into the sand. His spotter crouched beside him, eye pressed to the spotting scope. A Kestrel, 5,700 elite, clutched in his hand. The air temperature was 94 degrees. The barometric pressure low. The wind erratic. Through the scope, the target moved into view. Stepping into the compound courtyard below a Taliban commander flanked by 2 armed men, the JTAC confirmed positive identification from the ISR feed relayed to the Tactical Operations Center. Permission to engage was already granted. Garrett loaded a Hornady 750 grain AMAX, 50 BMG match round, chambered it, and adjusted his breathing. The rangefinder confirmed 2,614 meters. His spotter read the wind, input the data, and called the hold. Garrett steadied the crosshairs, exhaled, and squeezed. The TAC-50 cracked, a deep concussion echoing through the valley walls. 3 seconds later, a dust plume burst low and left, 3 meters from the target. The men in the courtyard froze, then scattered. The spotter recalculated. Wind drift correction. 9 mils right. Garrett adjusted, recentered, and fired again 40 seconds later. The round hit high and right, slamming into the wall above the doorway. The window was closing fast. Colton cursed under his breath and keyed his radio. He called for close air support. The JTAC relayed up the chain, reporting that an Apache gunship was inbound, but still 26 minutes out. The captain hesitated, watching the ISR feed flicker as the target disappeared into the main building. The heat distortion made every movement deceptive. The valley's wind shifted without warning, gusting between 12 and 16 knots. Garrett shook his head, frustration tightening in his jaw. Through her own scope, Sarah Miller watched the same scene unfold but saw what he couldn't. The wind wasn't random. It moved in a rhythm, pulsing through the valley every 40 seconds, dropping into stillness for a few heartbeats before rising again. She tracked it quietly, her breathing steady, the sound of the rifle still echoing in her chest. The air around her felt heavy, full of doubt and heat. She knew what had to happen next. The silence after Garrett's second miss felt heavier than the air itself. The target had vanished into the compound, and every second that passed risked losing the mission. Heat shimmered off the rocks, and the wind carried fine dust that stung the back of Sarah Miller's neck. Through her scope, she kept scanning the valley. The others focused on equipment and comms, but she watched the dust trails along the ground, the way the mirage rippled, the subtle rhythm of movement in the air. The wind wasn't chaos. It was a cycle, every 40 seconds. The gusts slowed into a steady calm that lasted just long enough for a single, perfect shot. She shifted her focus to Captain James Voss, who crouched over the map tablet nearby. Her voice was calm when she asked permission to re-engage. He hesitated, the weight of command clear on his face. The JTAC relayed that air support was still minutes away. The captain double-checked with the chain of command, then gave a short nod. It was by the book professional. Deliberate, lawful, nothing reckless. Just trust, earned through competence. Sarah moved beside the TAC-50, taking Garrett's place without a word. She checked the weapon, ran her hand along the receiver, and confirmed the Hornady 750 grain AMAX round was chambered. The Kestrel's data matched what she had in her head: temperature, pressure, range. She recalculated the ballistic drop and wind drift silently, verifying every number. Then she adjusted her body position, aligning perfectly behind the rifle. Her breathing slowed. In that moment, the noise of the team, the static from the radio, even her own pulse faded. Her father's voice came back to her, quiet and familiar patience and breathing. Everything else is noise. She settled behind the scope, crosshairs steady, watching the valley for the next cycle of calm. The wind began to fall still again, and the world narrowed to her, the rifle, and the space between. Sarah Miller lay prone behind the Macmillan TAC-50. The rifle's matte barrel pointed across the wide valley, The sun beat against her back, the air shimmering in waves. She ran her final checks with the same precision she had practiced for years. The range was confirmed at 2,617 meters. The Kestrel 5,700 Elite displayed air temperature at 94 degrees Fahrenheit, barometric pressure at 25.8 inches of mercury, and an altitude near 7,200 feet. She knew exactly what those numbers meant. The thinner air would reduce drag, extending the bullet's time of flight just past 3 seconds. Gravity would drop the round roughly 47 meters by impact. At that distance, even a 1-mile-per-hour wind shift could send the bullet several feet off target. She closed her eyes for half a second, visualizing the ballistic curve. Her fingers moved to the optic, adjusting the elevation turret to 38 mils, dialing 6 mils of right windage, and deciding to hold an additional 3 mils with the reticle to compensate for the gust pattern she had studied. The math was sound, but data wasn't enough. She trusted her eyes more than the instruments. The mirage across the valley pulsed in the same rhythm she had noticed earlier, dropping into calm for 6 or 7 seconds, every 40 seconds. She waited, counting in her head. When the wind eased, Sarah shifted her weight, her body perfectly aligned behind the rifle. The Harris bipod bit into the earth. The buttstock pressed against her shoulder, and the rifle felt like an extension of her breathing. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. She exhaled, held at the natural respiratory pause, and began to press. The shot broke clean. The TAC-50's deep concussion rolled through the ridge, echoing across the valley like distant thunder. For 3 long seconds, nothing moved. The bullet traveled at 2,800 feet per second, dropping and drifting. As the equations predicted, gravity pulled it down nearly 50 yards, and the crosswind nudged it 23 meters to the right before the spin and drag stabilized it. At 3.1 seconds, the valley answered. A dull puff of dust lifted from the compound courtyard. Through the spotting scope, the spotter saw the target collapse. The confirmation came through the headset impact center mass. Target neutralized. A second later, the JTAC relayed from the ISR feed, confirming what everyone already knew. The shot had hit exactly where it needed to. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind filled the silence. Carrying the echo of the rifle back toward them, Garrett lowered his head. Disbelief, mixing with respect. Colton grabbed his radio, reporting the successful engagement to Captain Voss. The captain gave quiet acknowledgement, his voice steady but edged with awe. Sarah stayed behind the scope, her cheek still pressed against the stock. She didn't smile. Herr Pulse steadied. Her breathing even. It wasn't triumph, she felt, only the gravity of precision and consequence. Across the valley, the dust began to settle. The ridgeline went quiet again. Only the soft rustle of the wind remained, moving through the dry grass, like the valley itself was finally exhaling. The echo of the shot faded slowly across the valley, until only the wind remained. No one spoke. The silence felt heavier than the sound that had come before it. Staff Sergeant Sarah Miller lifted her head from the scope, her breathing steady, her hands unmoving. The Macmillan TAC-50 still pressed against her shoulder, warm from the recoil. Across the valley, the target lay motionless. The spotter confirmed again through the glass. The JTAC relayed the feed from the drone, confirming the kill. Everything was by procedure. No celebration. No applause. Just quiet acknowledgement of a mission completed. Sergeant Daniel Garrett looked through his spotting scope again, disbelief softening into respect. He had seen the same wind, the same valley, but she had seen what he could not. Staff Sergeant Mark Colton keyed his radio, transmitting the engagement report. Captain James Voss composed the after-action summary for the Tactical Operations Center, every detail logged exactly as doctrine required. The job was done, but no one felt lighter for it. They moved back through the mountains under the full weight of the sun, their shadows long against the sand. The patrol said little, their silence more respectful than fatigue could explain. By the time they reached Forward Patrol Base Tillman that afternoon, word had already spread. A 2,600-meter confirmed engagement, the longest of the deployment, the quiet Marine who made the impossible shot. Days later, Colton found Sarah near the logistics yard. He stood awkwardly before admitting he had been wrong to doubt her. She accepted without pride, saying only that everyone carries assumptions, and what matters is what you do once you see them clearly. That evening, Garrett stopped by her workspace. He asked how she had read the wind. She spent half an hour explaining the rhythm of the mirage, the waiting, the silence between gusts. She taught the way she had learned calm, patient, without ego. Months later, she stood in the arrival terminal at Billings, Montana. Her father waited at the gate, older but unchanged. He hugged her long without asking questions. That night, under a sky full of stars, she told him about a shot that had to be perfect. He nodded, listening. Then he said the words he had always said, patience and breathing. Everything else is noise. She looked up at the stars and smiled, knowing he was right. Every mission leaves a mark, but some define what it means to be a professional. For Sarah Miller, that day in the Afghan Valley became more than a test of skill. It was proof that discipline and preparation matter more than perception. The first lesson was simple, but earned through sweat and patience. Skill outweighs assumption. The second, deeper still, was that every decision in combat lives within structure. You follow orders, respect the chain of command, and execute with precision, not impulse. And the third, hardest to carry, is that real professionalism isn't just about hitting a target. It's about bearing the moral weight of knowing what that shot means. Her calm precision changed the way others saw her, not because she demanded recognition, but because she never needed to. She showed that respect is earned quietly. One round, one decision, one mission at a time. The tools she used were as real as the discipline behind them. The Macmillan TAC-50 is a 50 BMG rifle trusted by U.S. and Allied snipers for extreme range. It pairs with a Harris bipod, Hornady 750-grain AMAX ammunition, and environmental instruments like the Kestrel 5700 Elite Ballistic Computer and Vectronics Rangefinder. The story reflects real U.S. military procedure. A captain, an O3, authorizes the engagement, NSAOS execute. And for clarity, the TAC-50 uses a muzzle brake, not a suppressor. And the proper spelling is Marine Corps, not Corps. If stories like this remind you of quiet courage, discipline, and the kind of respect earned in silence, stay connected, subscribe, share, or comment where stories of service and resolve still matter. Sarah's father said it best. The words she lived by every time she shouldered a rifle: patience and breathing. Everything else is noise.